thinking about that because today when you leave here, you're going to be starting seeds in this rainy weather here in San Diego.
Yeah, and because seeds, as you mentioned before, are something that I think everybody enjoys to do. It gives you that satisfaction of truly growing something. It's not just a matter of taking a plant and then transplanting it. It's starting it from seed, having it develop, having it grow, and then being able to transplant it or put it in an area that you're going to want to finish growing it out.
Have you gotten your kids involved yet? Do they think it's just this miracle, which we all think when you plant a seed and something actually grows?
Well, the fun thing is having them pick out what they want to grow because, that's what's going to really get them excited about growing it. If I'm like, hey, guys, we're all going to plant spinach, they're like, not so much fun.
No big deal.
But if they go to the shop and they get to pick out the seeds they want to grow and start, then they get really excited and actually go out every day after school and how's it doing? Is it growing yet? Kind of a thing.
So what do they like vegetable-wise?
A lot of tomatoes. They like a lot of tomatoes.
Great, that's good.
Isaac's into cucumbers.
And Isaac is how old?
He's 3.
He's 3, and then your daughter's 8.
8, exactly. Okay. And I'm into peppers, and Janine. I don't know.
Your wife.
She's
your wife.
This is kind of me and the kids.
She just kind of goes along with whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Is she a plant enthusiast because of you, or was she one before?
No, she's not at all, and still is not.
Still isn't.
She likes that I do all of that stuff.
That's your deal, Tiger.
Yeah, exactly.
She keeps a good house, though, right?
Yeah.
Now, John being from Michigan, it was a big deal. February, March, John, when the spring catalog would come out. I mean, you were like a kid at Christmas.
January, you started after Christmas. There's nothing to do except sit there next to the fire and flip through seed catalogs.
And then, so back in Michigan and the Midwest and back east, when could you really seriously plant something? Around April?
In the ground?
Yes.
No, May. Yeah. Mother's Day.
Wait, okay. Mother's Day is that the
right between Mother's Day and Memorial Day was the time you had about a 4-week window of planting, and if you missed that, you can just forget putting in a garden.
Yeah, you might as well not.
Well, what a difference here. It doesn't matter what time of the year it is here in San Diego.
Yeah, what a difference 3,000 miles
we
makes.
Just, you just take it home and plant it. And, oh, by the way, John, speaking of that, I called it you gave me a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I called it a node.
A node. That bulb?
The bulb?
It was a Scadoxis.
Scadoxis. I'll never remember that.
It has nothing to do with planting seeds.
But the reason that I go there is because even though it was already started, it has grown so much that even in that little bit of time, I'm amazed. And I want to take a picture because you asked how it was doing.
Yeah, that's a bulb, and I guess you could look at bulbs in the same way as you look at seeds.
To a degree.
Right, but when we're talking about planting seeds, earlier in today's show, we were talking to our good friend Melinda Myers, and she made an excellent point. She said that if you're planting a seed, make sure you look at the back of the package because it'll give you good ideas on when to plant. And back in the Midwest, and even here in California, there's certain plants that if you want to grow from seed, you don't put direct in the ground. You don't put the seeds direct in the ground. You actually start them either indoors or in trays somewhere, and then when they're large enough, you move them to the ground. And those would be things like tomatoes, peppers. Usually, not always, but usually the smaller the seed, the more likely you are to start it in a pot or a flat and then move it to the ground. That's not always the case, but usually large seeds go directly in the ground, and those would be peas, beans, corn, squash, cucumbers. Those are all relatively large seeds, and those usually you plant direct in the ground whenever the soil is warm enough for you to plant those particular things.
What is the largest seed?
Largest seed is a Laodicea, I believe it's pronounced. It's the double coconut from the Seychelles Islands. So
you're going to take his class next semester?
That's the world's largest seed.
I remember that. He mentioned that because it floated up. Yeah, I remember.
But it doesn't float. That's why you can only find them in the Seychelles.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's
you find other coconuts all around the world because they float.
They do float.
And so the ocean currents will just take them to different islands and things. But double coconuts don't float. Yeah. So they're just right there.
The other thing, when planning about what seeds you start, and this kind of doesn't go along with what John had mentioned, but it's my own little tip, is root plants. So carrots, beets, turnips, onions. You can still start those inside But I kind of recommend you wait until the weather is good outside.
And then just go right outside and plant
you
them.
plant them there, because sometimes disrupting that is why you're growing it. You know, it's okay to disrupt a tomato plant and transplant it outside. But, you know, a carrot, which you're trying to get to develop, it's that fine time of when you can transplant it without messing it up, kind of a thing.
Right.
So I always recommend waiting until you can plant those in the garden.
So you've got veggie pod, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
How many different varieties do you have in your veggie pod right now? What are you growing in your veggie pod?
I'm finishing up right now, and you know, part of what I'm doing today, but I usually put about 3 or 4 varieties of plants in the veggie pod.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how you
just in one?
How do you decide what you're going to put in the veggie pod versus outside in the ground?
Critters.
Yeah,
what I think is gonna do better with critters outside versus, you know, the veggie pod, which I'm trying to keep, you know, most things away from, and it's raised up and off the ground and protected by the netting and all of that. So
now, John, have you thought far enough ahead with your new property, the house you're building, things that you do want to start from seed, looking that far ahead? Aside from all the things you're transplanting from your old home to your new home.
Nope.
Not yet, huh?
Not at all.
Not at all. Not even, never a passing thought.
No, not yet.
Will that happen, though?
Maybe. Maybe it depends. Right now I'm overwhelmed with the task I have in front of me.
There's a lot going on with you.
You know, a couple tips for starting seeds indoors, whether you're in a cold climate or here in San Diego. You can go, this is the only time I would recommend using a sterile potting soil.
Mm-hmm. It's really important, right?
Seed starting soils are sterile, and normally you want a soil that's biologically active. But the advantage to using a sterile soil is you don't get soil-borne diseases like damping off, which you can tell if you have, because your seeds all germinate and they look really good.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next day you come by and they're all bent over and dead. And that's called damping off. They just looks like they had a heart attack. They just keeled over and died. So by using a sterile soil, you can eliminate that.
Is there any other way to eliminate that with a regular potting soil? Is there anything you can put in the soil to?
There's fungicides you could use.
Use.
Captan used to be. I don't know if Captan's still available, but you know, but why not just start with a sterile soil to begin with, and then you don't have to worry about chemicals.
Now, you talked about looking at the back of the package for the best time.
Because it tells you how long it takes the seed to germinate, how long it takes to produce if once the plant's in the ground. And something else, now with the internet, you can always Google information on, you
go to YouTube and watch a video on
put
something.
Germinating lettuce seeds or something like that. The reason I mention that is that it's not always important, but there are some seeds that germinate better in the presence of sunlight, and some seeds need darkness before they germinate. And you can find that out easily just by checking it out online.
Now, I would imagine it might depend upon what you're planting in terms of seeds, but how far down should you plant a seed? For someone that's never done it before, how do they know how far down in the soil?
Usually they recommend 1 to 2 times the depth of the diameter of the seed.
Okay.
Yeah.
And from there, you just
also, we've talked about this before, but this was something growing up I never understood. They used to talk about planting things like watermelon and cucumbers and squash in hills, put so many seeds to a hill.
On a slope out, you're talking about.
Well,
right?
what we would do, we'd make this little mound and then stick the seeds in there. And I always wondered, why do you do that? Because then when it rains or you water, all the dirt comes away.
And then the seed's on the ground.
And then I found out that that was just some old English translation of a word that doesn't really mean a hill or a mound.
Oh, boy.
It just means that they go together in one area. So they should be planted in a flat area, not on a
Never
hill.
a mound or a slope.
Right.
So start with a sterile seed starting mix.
Right.
If you're, in a container, there's a lot of containers out there. I mean, again, to avoid any kind of disease, you want to maybe, use a clean container,
right.
But some people use old color packs or
some things are ready to go. Already sterile, like Jiffy Pots.
The Jiffy Pots, or that, what was it, that cow pot?
Cow pot you'd have to add soil to.
you mean like already ready,
Right.
with soil and everything.
With Jiffy pots, you just, oh, I'm sorry, I meant the Jiffy pellets.
Pellets, yeah.
With those, you add water.
I thought you were talking popcorn there for a second.
Well, it's a little disc. You add water to it. The pot comes up, and you just plant your seeds inside.
Well, that's cool.
No soil or anything.
You put it
required.
in a little tray that the pellet wicks up the moisture for you. Those are super easy.
But that's a good point you bring up about watering. Is once you've planted your seeds, usually you water them in, and then no more water until you see the seeds germinate or until the soil happens to get really dry. Especially
with that veggie pod, you need hardly any water at all.
Correct.
Now, what about the rain though? What I know there's the cover is not. You could it's a mesh. How much water? What's the rain? How is the rain affecting your veggie pod at all in terms of moisture?
I mean, it's keeping it wet, but it also has the drain hole, and even with
and
any
it's good
seeds,
water. It's good water.
Yeah, and with any seeds, you want good drainage as well, and that's part of the seed starting mix. It is better draining than most potting soils, because as John had mentioned, you want it to be watered. You want it to have that initial this is time to grow thing, but then it doesn't want to be sitting underwater, and so that's why you want good drainage. And it's actually really hard because John, you mentioned you water it and then you don't water it again until you start to see it sprout, and that takes a lot of restraint for a lot of people because they think, I should water more and more and more. But if you are starting it inside, it's probably not evaporating off very quickly.
Right.
If you are starting them inside, you don't have the wind and all the other thing that takes away moisture, and so it's a tough balance. But then one of the biggest mistakes I see people make too is it starts and then it droops and they water it and then it droops, and it's like you have to at the point that it starts, you have to keep it damp,
evenly moist at that point.
Yeah,
right.
You don't want that wet dry for the seed because it'll have a tough time getting going at that point in time.
Seeds have a protective coating on them that stops them from germinating. That's why they can sit there for a while and still be alive, even though they look like they're dry. So what signals to the seed it's safe and the environment safe, you should start growing, is the moisture that wears away that chemical coating that's on the seed. That's why you can take some seeds like beans or corn or peas and soak them in water for 3 or 4 hours. They'll take in the moisture, they'll plump up, and sometimes you can get those things to germinate even overnight.
Okay, because that loosens up that protective barrier.
Right, or washes away the chemical that it's in.
What do you think about those people that, sometimes they'll start it in a wet paper towel? You've seen that where they kind of tell you to take that bean and they start in a wet paper towel and then they tell you to transplant it. I kind of feel it's like double work.
Yeah,
right?
Why do that?
I get it that you're keeping it moist and you get to see it.
Well, maybe they think they're doing what John just talked about, and if that's the case, that's wrong. That's not the way to do it, right?
Right.
Maybe they've heard that before, that if you moisten it up, it's going to help germinate quicker.
Right.
That's the only reason I can think of.
I feel anytime that you move that seed while it's growing, that tender root, you're opening up your risk for it to not work.
You're damaging the hair roots and
then every time you do that, and that's why I kind of mentioned about the carrots and the turnips, is every time that you go to transplant that plant, you're taking a risk, no matter how good you are.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And so you want to be able to have like just a couple moves. And starting it inside is move number 1, and then move number 2 should be outside in your vegetable garden or your flower garden or wherever it may be. But there shouldn't be a whole bunch more in between that. I mean, what would we be starting from seed that you've talked about where you want to go up in stages? You had mentioned, plants go up in stages before, where you don't want to put them in too big of a pot because they try to fill up the pot before they begin to grow. Is there any flowers or seeds that you would normally start inside that you wouldn't want to do that with, or all of them pretty much can, right?
I would think so, yeah.
Yeah. So
I had a question for you, Tiger, relating to your veggie pod. Oh, onions. Are you growing onions?
No. I am not. We're not big onions eaters.
Really?
So that's the other thing is grow what you're going to use.
Yeah, I would. I'm a big onion guy.
Yeah.
Love and then radishes, of course, they grow like in 24 hours, right?
Exactly.
I remember one year I planted turnips. Got these huge turnips, but no one in my family eats turnips.
Right? Look at this. That is great.
Like,
what are you going to do with it? Well, we'd eat it.
You know,
Not in this house.
You had mentioned in the beginning what my kids like. That it's funny because you don't think about this for kids, but it's always those rainbow beet packages that catches every kid's eye because there's yellows and reds and purples and oranges and stuff, and it just looks exciting to plant those beets.
The beets or the chard?
Well, no, the beets.
Okay.
They have all those beets,
Yeah.
And so the kids gravitate towards
Sure.
that one. And it's so that's always one that they want to grow. And
But do they eat the beets?
I was like, you guys aren't going to eat them though. You're not going to eat the beets.
I'm not a beet guy.
I like a
guess
beet salad.
Maybe I haven't had.
An heirloom beet salad will surprise you if you're not a
Really?
beet eater.
Yeah.
Yeah, with a little bit of oil and vinegar.
Yep.
And
I
that's
just
it.
don't.
Yeah.
There's just not
and
much
they use
of a taste.
that thick balsamic
Yeah.
sauce. Oh man. Oh, so
I
good.
just all I've ever had briefly in my life is a here, have some beets, or here's a beet. And I'm like, I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't. There's no the flavor is.
I've
not
told
really,
you before that when you go to New Zealand, and you go to McDonald's and get a hamburger, that they don't use pickles; they use beets.
That's like in Hawaii. Every time you order a meal, there's pineapple on the side. Went to McDonald's and they give you pineapple.
Well, that would be fine.
That's fine.
I'd rather have pineapple
Than a
on the
beet?
side than a beet on my
A
hamburger.
beet. What is that a saying?
Could be, should be.
So we kind of covered watering. We covered starting it. What light? If you're starting it inside, a windowsill good enough?
Yeah, as much light as possible, but then it's also you bring up the light. Then you've got if you have the plant indoors, you've got to transition it from indoors to outdoors. If you have a plant that's been growing indoors, like you were saying, Brian, with no wind or anything like that, and you put it outdoors, it's going to get thrashed.
Sure.
Right.
Sunburned, wind damage. So as the seeds come up, even if you have cold, freezing nights, if the daytime temperatures are warm enough to where you can put them outside in the sun for even a couple hours a day to harden them up a little bit and then bring them in at night, then when you do go to transplant them outdoors, you'll be much more successful.
Right.
Fertilizer. When would be the first time you fertilize?
Depends on what you're using. If it's a sterile soil,
Mm-hmm.
then there's no fertilizer
Right.
in that soil. So what I would probably do would be to, when I water them with HB 101, which is also good for getting seeds to germinate.
Yeah. Right.
So I'd maybe use that at first, and then maybe a little bit of dilute liquid organic fertilizer, not a lot.
Yeah. Because you can burn a young seedling real easy with some fertilizer.
Right. Yeah. If the recommendation is 2 tablespoons per gallon, I might use 1 teaspoon per gallon.
And this is at the same time you're planting the seed to get it
Well,
established.
that's once they germinate, but I would put the HB 101 in at planting time.
But you also mentioned if the soil has everything it needs, you may not want to do that, right?
Yeah, but it's not going to have everything you need if you're using a sterile soil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the problem.
So, yeah, and then after that you're growing it and you transition it, as you just mentioned, to make it survive your outdoor environment. And even then, once it's outside, some areas you get those weird weather turns where you waited until Mother's Day to plant it, and that's all good. And the week later though, it turns for the worse, and you have to cover it or you have to protect it during that one night or 2 nights, and you'll get them growing. Then after that, I feel you can be more successful with seeds if you kind of start them that way than even some plants that you buy from a nursery, because from a nursery they grew them usually in some kind of hothouse. They did harden them off, but then some nurseries are protected. Some of those big box store nurseries are actual just kind of protected greenhouses.
Yeah.
You go to take that home and it's not protected.
Completely
at your
different
house.
environment.
Yeah, so you got to be careful of that, but you'll be real successful and you have the fun. I mean, Brian, you mentioned starting from seed gives you much more satisfaction than,
absolutely,
just growing the plant.
Then it's when it's already started, that's fine, but when you grow from a seed, it's just amazing.
Yeah, and then if you are a gardener, cost effective wise, you can buy a package of seeds for a couple dollars and get 12
a bumper crop,
15 plants, where if you were to go buy 12 or 15 plants from a nursery, you could be looking at $40 to $50 depending on what you're getting.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
think
did
if you have kids, one thing you should always plant is sunflowers.
Yeah.
Oh,
they enjoy
sunflowers.
those.
Yeah,
'Cause they-
those still amaze me.
Yeah, they grow so fast, and different heights, and
Yeah.
kids, kids like, well, they're accustomed to having immediate results.
Yeah.
We've taught them that. So anything that takes forever to germinate, they're not going to be happy.
They lose
with.
interest and forget that we even did it to begin with.
Yeah.
Did we cover most everything we wanted to cover on seeds?
We did, except the popsicle sticks.
Go ahead.
Oh.
We always used to use when we were little. I don't know. Do people still do that?
Oh, definitely. We do it at the nursery all the time.
You
Really?
take a popsicle stick, and then after you planted your seeds, you open like the bottom or the top of the seed packet, and you stick it over the popsicle stick, and you put that in the ground as a plant marker.
Now
to
you
show
know
where
what
the
you've
plants
got.
were.
Yeah.
Now you know what you've got.
I always forget.
I remember the first time I used the veggie pot, I was kind of like just indiscriminately planting stuff. And you said, next year, do rows.
Yeah.
It made a huge difference. And I knew where everything was. I knew what I had planted.
Yeah.
Otherwise, something comes up. And things can look a lot like each other when they come up.
Oh, definitely.
Is that
right?
cilantro or is that, what is that?
Yeah.
You have to taste it to find out. So, hey, that's going to do it. Thank you so much for tuning into this podcast. Any ideas for future podcasts here on Garden America, you can send those ideas to John at gardenamerica.com. Or if you want to send them to me, I know John gets a lot of emails, bmain22 at gmail.com. Let us know what you want to hear. And hopefully you're watching and enjoying our show on Saturday mornings right here on Biz Talk Radio and, of course, our Facebook Live. That's going to do it. Until next time, thank you so much for John Bagnasco, Tiger Palafox. I'm Bryan Main. We'll see you next time on yet another Garden America podcast. Take care. Have a great day.